You've been praying to a God outside yourself, haven't you? Asking for signs, begging for intervention, waiting for that divine hand to reach down and rearrange your circumstances. You close your eyes. You speak your desires into the void. You bargain with the universe like it's a cosmic vending machine that just needs the right combination of faith and desperation to deliver what you've ordered. And sometimes, just sometimes, something shifts. A door opens. An opportunity appears. A person shows up at exactly the right moment. But then the silence returns. The waiting resumes. The gap between you and the divine feels as vast as ever, and you're left wondering why connection feels so fleeting, why manifestation feels like catching lightning in a bottle, rather than turning on a light switch you've always had access to. This is the great illusion that has kept humanity in a state of spiritual separation for millennia. The belief that consciousness is something we possess rather than something we participate in. The assumption that God, Source, the universe, whatever name feels true to you, is an external force that we must somehow convince to pay attention to our small human dramas. But what if I told you that this entire framework is backwards? What if the very act of seeking God outside yourself is what keeps you from recognizing the divine intelligence that's already operating through your awareness, through your capacity to observe reality, and in that observation to participate in its creation? The quantum physicists discovered something that mystics have known for thousands of years, though they approached it through equations rather than meditation. When they looked closely enough at the building blocks of reality, they found that the act of observation itself changes what is being observed, not because the instruments are clunky or the measurements are imperfect, but because consciousness and matter are not separate phenomena. They are different expressions of the same underlying field of infinite potential. The observer and the observed are one system, one intelligence, one creative force experiencing itself from countless perspectives. But here's where it gets profound, where the implications start to reorganize everything you thought you knew about your relationship to existence. If consciousness is not produced by the brain, but is the fundamental substrate from which both brain and matter emerge, then you are not a separate being observing an external universe. You are the universe becoming aware of itself through the specific focal point of your individual awareness. You are not praying to God. You are God, dreaming the dream of being you. And in every moment of conscious observation, you are participating in the ongoing creation of reality. This isn't metaphorical. This isn't spiritual poetry designed to make you feel better about your human limitations. This is the actual mechanics of how existence operates. Every time you focus your attention, you are collapsing infinite possibility into specific experience. Every time you choose what to observe, what to think about, what to believe, you are literally selecting which version of reality becomes manifest in your experience. The universe isn't responding to your prayers because you are not separate from the universe. You are the universe praying to itself, and the answer is always yes because there is no difference between the one asking and the one answering. Yet most of us have been conditioned to experience ourselves as powerless witnesses to a life that happens to us rather than through us. We've learned to see consciousness as the result of complex neural activity rather than recognizing neural activity as the localized expression of infinite consciousness. We've been taught that we are biological machines navigating a physical world rather than understanding that we are awareness itself, temporarily focused through the lens of a human nervous system, participating in the grand experiment of individualized experience within the unified field of all that is. This conditioning runs so deep that even when we encounter these ideas intellectually, even when quantum physics and neuroscience point toward the participatory nature of reality, something in us resists. The ego mind, which has built its entire identity around being a separate self in need of external salvation, cannot survive the recognition that separation was always an illusion. It cannot maintain its sense of importance if you remember that you are not a part of God seeking reunion, but God experiencing the temporary illusion of being apart from itself. So the resistance shows up as doubt, as the need for proof, as the familiar comfort of victimhood and the strange security of limitation. Because if you truly accepted that you are the observer through which reality becomes manifest, you would have to take responsibility not just for your actions, but for your attention, your focus, your state of consciousness. You would have to acknowledge that the life you are experiencing is not happening to you, but is being generated by the quality of your observation, the coherence of your awareness. the frequency at which your consciousness is vibrating. The moment this recognition begins to dawn, something extraordinary and terrifying happens simultaneously. You start to notice that your inner state and your outer experience are not just connected, they are inseparable expressions of the same phenomenon. When your consciousness is scattered, when you're caught in mental loops of worry or regret, when your attention is fragmented across a dozen different fears and desires, your external reality reflects that chaos back to you. Opportunities feel elusive. Relationships feel complicated. Simple tasks become overwhelming. It's as if the universe itself has become unclear, unreliable, difficult to navigate. But in those rare moments when your awareness settles into presence, when your mind becomes quiet and your attention becomes focused, something else emerges. Synchronicities multiply. The right people appear. Solutions present themselves with elegant simplicity. It's not that the universe has suddenly decided to cooperate with you. It's that you have stopped interfering with the natural intelligence that was always flowing through your experience. You've temporarily stepped out of the way of your own creative power. This is where most people get confused, where they think they've discovered some kind of spiritual life hack that they can use to get better results from reality. They try to manipulate their consciousness the way they might adjust the settings on a radio, hoping to tune into the frequency of abundance or love or success. But this approach still carries the assumption of separation, the belief that consciousness is a tool you can use to get something from a universe that exists outside of you. It's still based on the illusion that you are a separate self, trying to influence external circumstances rather than recognizing that you are the field of awareness within which all circumstances arise. The shift that changes everything happens when you stop trying to use consciousness and start recognizing yourself as consciousness. When you stop attempting to direct the observer and start identifying as the observer. This isn't a technique or a practice or a method. This is a fundamental reorientation of identity, a remembering of what you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning that taught you to believe you were something smaller, something limited, something separate from the creative force of existence itself. When this recognition stabilizes, when you begin to live from the knowing that you are the awareness through which reality is experienced, rather than an object within reality having experiences, your entire relationship to manifestation transforms. You stop trying to create your desires because you recognize that desires are simply movements within consciousness, invitations from the infinite field to explore new possibilities of experience. You stop trying to change your circumstances because you understand that circumstances are the reflection of consciousness, not the cause of it. Instead, you begin to curate the quality of your observation. You become interested in the clarity of your awareness, the coherence of your attention, the frequency at which your consciousness is vibrating, not because you want to get something, but because you are something. You are the creative principle itself, exploring its infinite potential through the unique lens of your individual perspective. And just as a clear lens creates a focused image, while a dirty lens creates a distorted one, the clarity of your consciousness determines the quality of reality you experience. This is profoundly different from positive thinking or visualization or affirmation practices, though it may include elements of all of these. This is about recognizing that you are not using consciousness to create reality. You are consciousness creating reality. Every moment, every observation, every focus of attention is an act of creation, whether you're aware of it or not. The question is not whether you're creating. The question is what you're creating and how consciously you're participating in the process. But here's what happens the moment you truly accept this identity shift from observer as victim to observer as creator. Everything you thought you knew about how change occurs gets turned upside down. You've been trained to believe that transformation requires effort, that healing requires time, that manifestation requires technique. You've been conditioned to approach your problems from the outside in, changing behaviors to change thoughts, manipulating circumstances to feel different, working on yourself like you're a machine that needs repair, rather than recognizing yourself as the conscious field within which all experiences of brokenness and wholeness arise. The quantum view of reality reveals something far more elegant and immediate. If consciousness is fundamental, if awareness is the ground of being from which all experiences emerge, then transformation happens at the level of observation itself. When you truly see something clearly, when your awareness penetrates through the layers of story and assumption to touch the reality beneath, that reality spontaneously reorganizes itself. Not because you forced it to change, but because clarity is inherently transformative. When light shines into a dark room, the darkness doesn't struggle to leave. It simply wasn't there in the presence of illumination. This is why all the great spiritual traditions, despite their different languages and cultural contexts, point toward the same essential practice, the cultivation of witnessing awareness. Not because observation is a tool for achieving enlightenment, but because the capacity to observe without judgment, to be present without agenda, to witness without interference, is itself the expression of your true nature. It's the return to what you have always been before the conditioning, before the stories, before the learned patterns of separation and limitation convinced you that you were something other than pure awareness temporarily focused through human experience. When you begin to live from this recognition, when your identity stabilizes in the knowing that you are the observer rather than the observed, something magnificent starts to happen with your human experience. Instead of trying to fix your thoughts, you recognize thoughts as temporary movements within awareness. Instead of trying to heal your emotions, you recognize emotions as energy in motion within the field of consciousness. Instead of trying to manifest your desires, you recognize desires as invitations from infinity to explore new possibilities of experience. This doesn't mean you become passive or detached from life. Quite the opposite. When you know yourself as the creative principle, when you understand that reality is not happening to you but through you, you become far more intentional about the quality of consciousness you're embodying. You become interested in what kind of observer you are being. Are you observing with love or with fear? With curiosity or with judgment? With presence or with distraction? These are not psychological states you're trying to achieve. These are frequencies of consciousness you can choose to embody, and each frequency creates a different quality of experience. Love, for instance, is not an emotion you feel. Love is a frequency of consciousness you can embody, a quality of observation that sees the divine intelligence expressing itself through every form, every person, every situation. When you observe from love, you don't see problems that need solving. You see perfection expressing itself as apparent imperfection, infinite intelligence exploring its own potential through the dance of challenge and resolution, expansion and contraction, creation and dissolution. Fear, on the other hand, is not something that happens to you. Fear is a frequency of consciousness that observes reality as dangerous, that sees separation where there is only unity, that interprets the movement of life as threat rather than recognizing it as the creative play of consciousness, exploring its infinite possibilities. When you observe from fear, you create experiences that confirm the reality of danger, limitation, and separation. Not because these things are true, but because consciousness creates reality through the quality of its observation. This is the ultimate responsibility and the ultimate freedom. You cannot control what appears in your experience, but you can choose the frequency of consciousness from which you observe it. You cannot manipulate external circumstances, but you can curate the quality of awareness through which those circumstances are experienced. And in making this choice, in consciously embodying the frequency of observation that aligns with your deepest knowing of what's true, you discover that you are not subject to reality. You are the creative source from which reality springs. The ancient texts called this co-creation with the divine, but they were speaking from a dualistic framework that still assumed separation between human and God, between individual and infinite. The quantum understanding reveals that co-creation is simply the recognition of what has always been happening. There is no separation between creator and created. There is only one consciousness, one awareness, one creative intelligence expressing itself through countless focal points of observation, each one participating in the ongoing evolution of reality through the quality of attention they bring to existence. You are not learning to become a co-creator. You are remembering that you have always been the creative principle itself, temporarily forgetting your true nature in order to explore the experience of limitation, separation, and the journey of remembering. Every challenge you've faced, every limitation you've encountered, every moment of suffering you've experienced has been consciousness exploring its own depths, discovering its own power through the temporary experience of powerlessness. Now that you've touched this recognition, now that something in you has remembered what you actually are beneath all the stories of separation and limitation, the question becomes how to stabilize this knowing in your daily experience. How do you live from the recognition that you are consciousness itself without getting lost in the drama of human personality? How do you embody your identity as the observer while still participating fully in the world of form and relationship and practical responsibility? This is where the rubber meets the road, where mystical understanding translates into practical transformation. Because knowing that you are the creative principle is one thing. Living from that knowing consistently, especially when life presents challenges that trigger old patterns of fear and separation, that's where the real work happens. Not the work of trying to become something you're not, but the work of remembering what you are when everything around you is inviting you to forget. The key lies in understanding that you don't need to maintain some elevated state of consciousness or perfect spiritual demeanor to be effective as a conscious observer. You simply need to remember moment by moment that whatever you're experiencing is arising within awareness, not happening to awareness. When emotions get intense, you don't need to suppress them or transcend them. You need to recognize that you are the space within which emotions arise and pass away. When thoughts become obsessive, you don't need to stop thinking. You need to remember that you are the awareness that witnesses thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. This shifts everything about how you navigate challenge and change. Instead of asking, "How do I fix this problem?" you begin asking, "What is this experience inviting me to observe more clearly?" Instead of, "How do I get what I want?" you explore, "What quality of consciousness am I embodying? And is this the frequency from which I choose to create?" Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" you investigate, "How is this experience serving the evolution of consciousness through my particular focal point of awareness?" These questions don't bypass the practical aspects of human life. They revolutionize your approach to practical life by addressing reality at its source, rather than trying to manipulate effects while ignoring causes. When you recognize that external circumstances are the reflection of consciousness rather than the cause of experience, you naturally become more interested in the quality of consciousness you're embodying than in controlling outcomes. This doesn't mean you become passive about taking action in the world. It means your actions arise from presence rather than from anxiety, from clarity rather than from confusion, from love rather than from fear. And actions that arise from this centered awareness tend to be far more effective and elegant than actions motivated by the sense of separation and struggle that characterizes most human effort. You begin to notice that when your consciousness is clear, when you're resting in the knowing of what you are rather than being identified with what you're not, the right actions reveal themselves naturally. Solutions appear without forcing. Opportunities align without manipulation. Relationships harmonize without control, not because you've learned some kind of spiritual technique, but because you've stopped interfering with the intelligence that was always flowing through your experience. This is what it means to live as a conscious co-creator, not trying to use consciousness as a tool to get better results from life, but recognizing yourself as consciousness itself, exploring its infinite creative potential through the unique lens of your human experience. Every choice becomes an opportunity to express the quality of awareness you choose to embody. Every interaction becomes a chance to meet life from presence rather than from the patterns of the past. Every challenge becomes an invitation to discover new depths of the creative intelligence you actually are. And as this recognition deepens, as you begin to live more consistently from the knowing of your true nature, something beautiful starts to happen. The gap between inner knowing and outer experience begins to close, not because you've manipulated reality to conform to your desires, but because your desires themselves have been transformed by the recognition of what you are. You stop wanting things from a position of lack and start creating from a position of fullness. You stop trying to get love and start being love. You stop seeking peace and start embodying peace. The transformation is complete, not when your circumstances become perfect, but when you recognize that you are the perfection that was always present, temporarily exploring the experience of imperfection in order to discover the creative power of consciousness itself. You are not a human being having spiritual experiences. You are infinite awareness having a human experience. And every moment of that experience, every observation, every focus of attention, is participating in the ongoing creation of reality. This is your invitation not to become something new, but to remember what you have always been. To live from the recognition that you are not separate from the creative force of existence, but are that force itself, exploring its infinite potential through your unique perspective. And if this remembering has touched something true in you, if you feel called to explore these depths more fully, I invite you to stay connected with this journey we're sharing together. Subscribe to continue these conversations that awaken what's already true within you. Share in the comments below your own experiences of recognition, the moments when you've touched your identity as consciousness itself. Tell us about the shifts that are happening as you remember what you are. Let's create a field of mutual awakening, where observers support observers in the beautiful work of conscious co-creation. This is not just a channel you're following. This is a community of consciousness remembering itself through countless individual perspectives, including yours.